Try that.
All set.
Good to go? Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming to our Ergonomics 101 course. My name is Michael Maude, and I'm co-owner of a company called Strategic Spaces, and we are an office furniture company located in Boston and in Hartford, Connecticut. And we work very closely with our partners over at Human Scale as it relates to our ergonomics. So I'd like to introduce Jason Kohlberg. Jason is an associate ergonomist with a doctorate degree as well from University of Massachusetts, and does online presentations like this in many parts of New England. So I'm going to hand it off to Jason. And at the same time, I want you all to know that this presentation is also being recorded, and it will be available on the BioCT website. So feel free to access it or share it as you wish. So with that said, Jason, take it away.
Thanks, Michael. And you know, I'm a Terrier, not a Minuteman. So from Boston University, I got the doctorate. So pleasure, everybody. Well, thank you for joining. Again, my name is Jason Kohlberg. I'm the PT, also a board certified ergonomist with Human Scale. And we're going to be providing you this ergonomic education today. As we kind of just get over some IT issues here, so we do want to open this opportunity for you to have questions during the webinar, but we'd like to save those towards the end. So if you do have a question, I would encourage you to maybe type it in the chat that we can then review as we are kind of going through the end of the webinar. At that time, we'll also have like an open mic session where you can certainly ask questions, get any more feedback that you might need to at that point. And again, just for kindness to everybody else, just make sure that you're on mute. And again, cameras are optional if you want to. It's always fun to see people mess around with their desks while as we go through some of these things. But I'll turn off my video so you guys have all the opportunity to focus on the presentation as we move forward. So our goal for today is really to help you learn and how to configure a work environment to optimally fit your comfort and performance. Obviously, this pandemic has created a unique platform for when we're not in an office anymore, or you may be going back and forth from an office, being in the biotechnologies area, and also potentially working from home. So you may have two different set of ergonomic standards that you may be dealing with at this point. We really want to help elevate your awareness to some key ergonomic principles, guidelines, and adjustments. Also gave practical insight in how to achieve what we consider what we call a neutral posture while you're working. So to start off, we really need to kind of define, what is ergonomics? Some of you may have experience with this, some of you may not. Ergonomics is the science of fitting the task to the worker to maximize productivity while reducing discomfort, fatigue, and injury. Our goal for today with this is specifically making sure that when you're using your computer, your work tools, that we want them to be set up and fit to your body shape and size. Also, what we're going to do is we'll dabble into a little bit of this also same rule as it pertains to a laboratory environment as well. As we look at certain work areas, whether or not it be in the office or more, presently at home, this can have some setup concerns. One of them being that sometimes our chairs may have some lack of backrest or back support because you just didn't have one in the home potentially, maybe sitting on the couch or the sofa. Their armrests may not be adjustable for height or maybe lacking them. Often, sometimes even the chair may be lacking armrest as well. Inadequate work surface heights can lead to unsupported feet, and also inadequate monitor position. Obviously, the counter or desk that you may be placing these on could be in trouble. Give me 1 second. I just got to sit. No, we'll just go with it. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and talk about some postural basics and understand how we would view this in an ergonomic standard. When we look at this particular topic, we also I want to expand this as the biotechnologies area is understanding what does a risk factor mean. A risk factor ergonomically is obviously has to do with something with posture, but it also has the factors of duration, repetition, force, how much force are you required to, example, do some pipetting? How much and how much repetition does that exude on the specific part of the body of the thumb? What is the ambient temperature? Is there plenty of light? Is there doing this in a cold area where that has to maintain a certain ambient temperature? Or also, we need to understand there is a psychosocial component to this as well, which we don't talk about too much in this position. So as we think about these risk factors as we move forward, I do want you to kind of keep in the back of your head that as we explore these risk factors, keep that posture, duration, repetition, and force. All of these factors could amplify some of those risk factors. Ideally, what we want to try to do is avoid awkward postures. Awkward postures are really excessive muscle use, and they put more taxing stress on other parts of the musculoskeletal system, such as the neck, the ligaments, the tendons, such as in this particular picture of somebody working solely on a laptop on a fixed height desk. This can lead to bent neck position, a trunk flex position leaning forward. Their shoulders could be elevated, having to reach up to that work surface. Their forearms now may create more anchored or contact stress on their forearms. This could lead to some soft tissue compression on the back of the leg just because we're leaning forward on that front edge of the chair. And oftentimes this could lead to unsupported feet, causing us to be unbalanced while we're working. Again, all this is going to increase more muscular demand on your body. Specifically, when we look at the wrist posture, we want to try to maintain a straight wrist position as much as possible to avoid any musculoskeletal disorders that are related towards like the carpal tunnel syndrome or tendonitis in the forearm. Oftentimes, deviations in this area are largely associated with input devices being positioned incorrectly. Specifically, when we look at wrist posture, if our wrist is flexed or fingers facing downward, this is related to possibly the desk being too high. Wrist extension is oftentimes when we find our keyboard is elevated too high or our mouse is anchored, or potentially we're standing on and working on a taller surface and we're reaching down too far. This can all lead to more wrist extension. When we think about ulnar and radial deviation, this is really focused on the mousing task of, again, kind of when your wrist is anchored, you're going to move your wrist kind of inward or outward as you're mousing. This is also prevalent when we talk about in the laboratory environment, such as taking a graduated cylinder and maybe pouring. This also has a combination of motions of ulnar or radial deviation and also that wrist flexion, and this, as you can see in this picture. Related to pipetting, obviously, when we're pipetting, this could lead to some wrist extension because you may be reaching over to where the new pipettes are, and then radial and ulnar deviation as you're actually doing the activity of injecting and dispensing the pipette tip. When we move further up the arm, we talk about shoulder and elbow. We want to make sure we're maintaining these in a relaxed position. Our elbows and arms should be close to our torso and without extending or reaching too far forward. This is a nice point to mention. Remember is that as a human, your body is designed to have your arms naturally hang near your side. There is no thing that is in your anatomy that says, hey, I need to support my elbows and my arms when I'm doing work or moving around in space. Related to the shoulder and elbow, we can see that these risk factors of shoulder shrugging, oftentimes related to elevating our shoulders. Elbow extension is usually having our documents or work that we're doing too far away from us. So it causes us to reach and extend our arms. And then also, ultimately, we're also going to lean forward. When we look at shoulder abduction, specifically working with a keyboard or mouse, its relationship is how far away is it from my body? Specifically in a laboratory, you can see there could be a combinations of these risk factors, such as the right shoulder in this picture being abducted away from the body, doing some pipetting, and also the left arm being adducted across the body in this particular environment. And again, go back to that first slide that we talked about. How many times is this person doing it? How often is this task done? How much force is required when we're doing these type of tasks? When we look at postural trunk posture, oftentimes this is associated with lower back discomfort. We really want to encourage seating that optimizes the spinal curvature, that natural 3-position curve of our spine. So oftentimes utilizing the backrest with a chair is best used at this point to maintain that midline or upright position. Trunk posture, trunk flexion can also be seen oftentimes if our computers are too low or using a laptop, maybe even on a higher surface as well. But also in the laboratory area, you can see in this particular picture, she's totally lost contact with the back of her chair just by looking into some of these Petri dishes doing these tasks on a higher surface. Related to the trunk as well is also rotation. So having tools that may be misaligned and not centralized is going to lead to some repetitive type of rotational activity. Again, as we move further up the chain in the spine, we talk about the neck. This is more directly to neck posture and positioning to our visual system. What are we looking at and how are we viewing things? The neck posture is linked to, again, that upper body and shoulder discomfort because the musculature that originates from usually from the skull and then down to those shoulders, shoulder blades and towards the back. As you can see in these pictures, again, neck extension is related to, again, a position of a monitor maybe being too high. Neck flexion could be a monitor being too low or maybe just solely using a laptop. It could also be used in microscopy or any type of other activities where maybe we're using a laptop on a higher bench, having to really force our head in a flex position. Also related to just using a tablet or a cellular device. Contact stress is an area that we focus on when pressure is applied to soft tissue. Certain areas that are related to this are the wrists, the elbows, back of the thigh and the back of the knee. And then again, sensitive tissues like a nerve, blood supply, and also muscle tissue are related. So the desk edge can be related to that nerve or carpal tunnel area on the armrest of a chair or even the edge of a sharp counter or a biosafety cabinet. This is where you have your ulnar nerve or the funny bone that could be put more pressure on. This could also, some of these positions could lead to unsupported feet, which is going to put more pressure behind the back of your thigh, which we have a lot of soft tissue, blood supply, and nervous tissue running deep behind the back of the leg. Also, just relating to the seat height and position, this could cause contact stress and compressed blood flow going down to the bottom part of our leg with having too much compression or contact stress from the front edge of the chair and the back of your knee in your popliteal area. Ultimately, what we're looking for here is to achieve a neutral posture. Neutral postures are more energy efficient. There's significantly less muscle activity when we're in these positions, and there's less tax being put on the body's soft tissues. Implementing certain recommendations, comparing and contrasting the previous picture, again, elevating the monitor, implementing an external keyboard and mouse, raising them up and bringing them closer to you, adding a lumbar support to help maintain more natural spinal curvature, and then elevating that feet so that we're maintaining a good neutral position.
That are in the social sciences and ethical dimensions, and then focusing on one aspect or another.
If I could just have everybody just mute, that would be great.
Conclusions and won't provide critical information that's necessary. It's also necessary that these different research threads proceed in parallel so that each can inform the others.
There we go. All right. So what we're going to do now is talk about how to optimize your work environment. We're going to do this in a systematic way, going from your seating system to your hand position and then into your monitors. We'll talk about some lighting and documents as we move forward. Then we'll get into some laboratory considerations and talk about some healthier habits. To establish what is neutral posture is your feet flat on the floor, your thighs relatively parallel to the ground, a good space between the front edge of your chair and the back of your knee, about 2 inches. Your shoulders, your lower back and lumbar support should be positioned so it feels that lower space of your back. And also your shoulders should be relaxed. We're going to review some of these 5 ergonomic features of a task chair. Again, not all chairs have these, so recognize that, again, if you don't have this adjustment, there may be a way that you can make some adjustments as we move forward. Seat height, obviously, we're trying to maintain a parallel thigh position and our feet planted firmly on the ground. Seat depth, often this is found on the left-hand side of a chair or potentially in the front of the seat pan to allow you to move it forward or backward. You want to have a minimal of at least 2 inches of space between the front edge of your chair and the back of your knee. A backrest should be positioned such that it fills the lower back area. If you're finding that there is space between your trunk and the back of the chair, it might indicate that you need a little bit more back support at this time. Armrests should be adjustable, and ideally, again, they're called armrests for a reason, because they're meant for resting, not for working. They should be positioned no higher than your natural resting elbow height. And lastly, we have the recline tension. This is oftentimes the first opportunity where we can create more movement during our workday. So we would encourage you to unlock your chair and then also identify where the backrest tension knob is. By adjusting this, you can certainly recline throughout the day and feel supported by adjusting this tension knob. This is your first opportunity to create micro movement of your spine during your workday. Now, as we move away from the chair, let's talk about our hand and wrist position. At this point, it's really important for us to understand that in a desk environment specifically, most desks are about 29.5 inches to 30 inches tall. This will correlate to a 6'4" male who can naturally sit and key comfortably on top of this surface. Now, if we're not quite that height, there's obviously going to generate a gap here. And how do we adjust for this gap? One of the ways that we may be able to do this is, again, potentially elevating our chair and then elevating our feet to bring ourselves up to that level of the work surface, or potentially as we move forward, maybe potentially bringing those work tools down to a better working environment. Keyboard and mouse that are placed too high, again, and too far away can lead to shoulder shrugging, potentially contact stress such as the wrist and the forearm as you see in the picture, and also causing us to lean forward, increasing that demand in that lower back area. So repositioning your work tools is really important if they're too high and too far away. Ultimately, start simply bringing them closer. By bringing your work tools closer or scooting yourself closer to the desk, this will naturally bring your arms more closer to your side and reducing that discomfort of elbow extension. If you find that they're still not quite at the right height, you may want to consider potentially at home, maybe utilizing maybe a lap tray, or in the office, potentially maybe even utilizing a keyboard tray where we can lower our hands down to a more natural position and still maintain a good neutral seated posture. Specifically, when we look at a keyboard, oftentimes, traditionally, the keyboard tabs are elevated. This increases the angle of the keyboard, thus increasing the wrist angle. High wrist angle leads to high wrist pressure in the carpal tunnel area. We really want to minimize this angle, so we're minimizing the pressure point on that carpal tunnel area. So by simply flattening the keyboard tabs down, you reduce the wrist angle, and by implementing a palm support, you further put the wrist in more neutral position, reducing that contact stress. Now, palm support can be manufactured, but in the home environment, you could also potentially use a small towel, fold it up so it's the thickness of your keyboard and only about 1.5 inches in width. Ultimately, what you can see in this picture here highlighted is that there is no contact in that carpal tunnel area. So the median nerve that lives in this area is no longer in jeopardy. Similarly, when we talk about mousing activities, oftentimes, again, we mouse in more of a high wrist extension angle. This can lead to that anchoring and, again, doubling that pressure in the carpal tunnel area. So alternatively, what you can do is try shifting your hand about 45 degrees. So you're resting from your pinky all the way down the lateral side of your hand. And as you can see in this position, you've completely eliminated the carpal tunnel stress, again, on the median nerve, just by repositioning your hand. Moving now towards your monitors and documents. Specifically here, we do need to reference one little thing here as far as height, is that if you're only using a laptop, in order to make any type of ergonomic change at this point, you have to implement an external keyboard and mouse so that you can elevate the screen and separate the screen from the keyboard using a laptop. If you have all these things separate, first thing with height is we want to make sure that we're positioning it so the top of the screen or monitor is at or slightly below eye level. Next thing we look at is distance. Obviously start with your arms straight out. If you can touch your screen, this is always a good reference point to start. This will also vary depending on folks' use of corrective lenses and also their distance of their acuity when they can see things. Remember, if you're finding that you're losing contact with the back of your chair, oftentimes that means you're leaning forward to probably see your screen. So either move your screen a little closer or scoot yourself a little closer, or thirdly, maybe just use the zoom functions in the computer a little bit more often and bring that work to you. When we think of alignment, think about if you have a button-down shirt, that's your midline. Align that with your space bar, and then align that with the center of your monitor. If you're using two screens, angle them together about 15 degrees, and where they touch in the center, this is your new center point. Align that with the center of your space bar and then the center of you. When we look at now some lighting, lighting is important, especially since we're working remotely, because there's two major challenges that we see with lighting. Is that one, monitors and documents have two completely different lighting requirements. And second is that individuals also have different lighting requirements. Monitors, remember, generate light that go directly to your eye versus conversely, when you read a document, light is usually coming from overhead and it has to reflect off of that document back into your eye. This is why reading a paper-based document such as a journal or any type of newspaper, this requires 10 to 20 times more light than viewing a monitor. Now, individuals, as we get older, our eyes do change. As we go into the 6th and 7th decades of life, oftentimes the contrast levels are significantly different, and it makes this harder for us to see. So we might require more lighting as we adjust and get older. When working remotely, at this point, oftentimes we're at home, we have a lot of ambient windows in our letting in natural light. It's really important we consider where do we place our desk. Ideally, what we're looking for is about 90 degrees to any incoming window or light source. Oftentimes, this is to minimize screen glare, but you still might need to use those curtains or blinds during certain portions of the day to make sure that your computer light source is the more powerful light source coming directly towards your eye to minimize eye fatigue. Now, if you do a lot of paper-based work or even some fine work, you may want to consider utilizing a task light. A task light is an adjustable light that's going to be placed on your desk specifically to increase the light intensity of a certain area. Ideally, what we're looking for in an office environment or even at home is place the task light on the non-dominant side of your desk. Adjust it so it's below eye level and not shining on your computer screen. By doing this, you'll eliminate screen glare and also eliminate any shadowing effect that's going to occur when you bring your right hand, if you're right-handed, to write or read on that document. So obviously, this also creates another opportunity for movement called the sit stand. So why is standing such a thing now? Well, I guess the question is, it's because we're sitting too much. We have 95% of our workday is now spent sitting. Prior to COVID, just think about your commute in. I know sometimes I drive in for maybe an hour or take a train in, then I'd walk, then I'd go and sit, and then I'd do the same. And when I get home, what am I doing again? I'm probably sitting. So a lot of our workday or normal activity, we're still spending sitting. Research has shown that when you're sitting for too long, this can put extra pressure on our spinal discs, contributing to premature spinal disc degeneration. It also shows that inactivity, such as a static activity of sitting, can also affect our circulatory system, increasing our risk of heart disease, as is shown in this study, specifically with women. Also, prolonged sitting is related to, again, we just talked about cardiovascular demands. 1 hour of static sitting can lower the serum blood level of the LPL enzyme by 90%. And for those of you who don't know, the LPL enzyme is your fat burning enzyme. So again, this could lead to, again, maybe some weight management or lower metabolism type issues, but also lowering the levels of your good cholesterol, of your HDL. Standing has its own health implications. Again, standing, remember, requires more energy, 20% more energy just to hold yourself up. You're also putting yourself in a position where you're putting more pressure through more parts of your body, such as your hip, your knee, your ankle, your toe joints as you're moving forward, and also increasing that demand of the muscular system. Because we are standing, oftentimes this can lead to, again, swollen lower legs, then causing pressure on the venous system, causing inflammation, which potentially could lead to the issue of varicose veins developing. Now, the compromise obviously is a sit-stand type environment where we're creating movement during the day. This can help with weight control. We can lose about 340 extra calories just by standing for about 2 hours per day than normally sitting. We can also lower our risk of coronary artery disease and also death by increasing our cardiovascular function. We're also going to be more productive. Oftentimes, you'll find yourself taking less breaks, less frequency of breaks, and also the duration of those breaks is going to be significantly less. Ideally, we want to follow some of those similar guidelines for setting up some type of sit-stand area where your monitor is going to be elevated such that the top of it is at or slightly below eye level. Your keyboard and mouse should be aligned such that it is slightly below your wrist in your elbow, so your wrist is going to be more in a neutral position. Remember, you should stand relaxed and comfortably on both feet, and your shoulders should be relaxed at your side. If you do have an opportunity to create this environment or work on it, it's really important that you follow a simple guideline of this 28-2 rule, which was created by Dr. Alan Hedge, a well-known, world-renowned ergonomist from Cornell. In this cycle of a 30-minute work cycle, you should only sit for about 20 minutes, then get up and stand for maybe about 8. And then again, your 2 minutes of your time is for that micro stretch or potentially a bio break, going in to get in a glass of water, any of these kind of information. So ideally, what you're looking for in a normal workday is that you're going to do about 2 cycles an hour. So about only standing about 16 minutes, which a total time will lead into about 2 hours per normal workday. So as we're moving forward, I do want to remind everybody, if you do have questions as they're coming up or need more information, go ahead and you can type them into the chat, and then we'll certainly look at them as we're getting towards the end. But now we want to really talk about some laboratory considerations here, specifically in the biotechnologies area. When we think about the biotechnologies area, we're oftentimes spent a lot of time standing. We're working in laboratories. The laboratory areas can has its own unique ergonomic considerations, such as we may put ourselves in a more trunk or neck flex position. There's prolonged static positionings where we're standing for longer periods of time. The work surface height is different than a desk. The equipment height, where we're placing things, may be related to the shelving that may be involved or available, and also the space that this equipment might need. The location of work tools is critically important, so we're not overextending things, and also understanding the duration of these tasks. We might need to incorporate more cyclic work or change in task or rotation. Specifically, as we mentioned, the desk height, the work surface height is really important. Most lab benches are about 36 inches tall. This correlates to a standard standing elbow height of somebody who can work comfortably on this work surface. They're about 5'1", about 5 feet tall. So look at your workforce and look at where everybody's at. Oftentimes, if this is not the person that might be in your work area, they might find themselves doing a lot more bending or forward bending or trunk flexion and looking downward. Similarly, when we talked about the work area, we want to create an area where our work tools are in like a 16-inch radius of around our main work area. So again, what things am I needing to use the most and the most frequently, I need to keep them close. I need to avoid any of that extended reaching outside of my body and also above my shoulder. Those are all kind of what we call moderate to high risk work zones. As you can see, again, avoiding some of that contact stress of, again, putting a lot of pressure on the inner part of the elbow just by using that sharp desk edge. So oftentimes thinking about the counter surfaces that you might be looking at, they should be rounded, and also, again, educating the employees on how to potentially position or utilize the stools a little bit better. Oftentimes I find why people are doing this when they're not using the cutouts really well is because the cutouts are full of stuff. That's their secondary storage of any kind of supplies. So really need to make sure that those are open and clear. Also, again, avoid that neck flexion position when using your computer screen. This is an opportunity where you may want to look at, how do I elevate this screen potentially that I may be using, or is it encompassing potentially using monitor arms and screens and taking a laptop as only, again, the computer at this point when we're connecting them. So again, avoid a lot of these extended arm and shoulder abduction positions. You want to keep your arms close to your body. Again, this can be very taxing on the upper shoulders and neck. The more frequently that you do these, again, a lot of times these are not a high force type activity, but they are a high repetition type of activity, which means that the things are going to be working more frequently and harder. Specifically, the technique of pipetting, again, high levels of repetition and duration are seen in this type of tool that's been used. That oftentimes has led to a lot of wrist extension. And as we mentioned earlier, high degrees of wrist extension, just the angle itself, increases carpal tunnel pressure. Also, we can have an overuse of our thumb just when we're pipetting, again, to aspirate liquids and also to depress and also eject the tips. There's more force that might be needed in specifically the thumb. And again, what surface height are we doing these on? Are we doing it in a biosafety cabinet? We're working on a lab bench. Other restrictions may cause us to create more change in posture at this position. So you may want to also consider a certain pipette design. So again, traditionally, what we've seen is, again, shoulders can be abducted away, called the winged arm position, from their body, and also causing them to extend their wrists, and also combination of radial and ulnar deviate when they create this activity of putting a new tip on and then ejecting one into maybe a biosafety bag or waste hazard bag. Alternatively, you may want to consider thinking about simply the first thing that you can control is your body posture. Keep your arms close to you. Allow your body to rest more naturally and comfortably. Look at your work area around you. Bring things maybe a little bit closer to you. And when pipeting, try to make sure you're using a more neutral wrist position so you're not putting pressure on that carpal tunnel area. Next thing you might want to look at is an engineering model, potentially looking at alternative, potentially pipette devices, and also making sure we're matching the device demand for the size. So if there's a way that you can do a multi-pipetter for that specific task, that's going to eliminate a lot of extra pipetting if it can be done more than once. As we talk further about biosafety cabinets, these are, again, create a unique environment because they're a lot of times they're at a fixed height. And oftentimes I find when I'm working in these areas is that the biosafety cabinets are fixed at about 32 inches. So again, now they're higher than a standard work desk. So that means that this can increase that demand on the lower back because now things are even higher than your keyboard or mouse. So this is oftentimes why you see them have stools. And again, a lot of times what I find is that they do have foot rings, but the foot rings are all at the bottom, so they're not adjusted properly. Inappropriate work surface heights are, as we just mentioned. So again, now positioning the work tools that inside the biosafety cabinet is important, and understanding you're taking in what you need, but place it in an order that you can also reach it, because everybody's arm's length is going to be a little bit different. Plus, we have the physical limitation of the glass shield in front of us that will not allow us to get any closer. This is oftentimes, again, where people will start to anchor their arms on the edges of the cabinet, and this can cause more pressure and contact stress on the edges. So you may want to consider maybe some padding along the front edge of this, but also think about operationally, maybe have more control over how long somebody stays and does these kind of tasks. Institute some standards that tell you, you can only do this activity for a certain amount of time before you need to kind of go walk away and take a break. Ideally, other things that you can work on, again, look at reclining when possible. So if you're waiting or have a timing, that's a good time to potentially use the backrest of the stool, lean back, relax, create that micro environment of movement during your day. Always try to conduct your work at elbow height. Again, try not to avoid any reaching, or again, if it's too low or your stool's too high, you might cause you to bend forward. Bring objects closer to you as possible. Again, maybe using that foam padding that you can place in the front edge of the desk of the biosafety cabinet. And again, control the task rotation. As you can see here, again, another pictures of, again, the typical elbow winged position with pipetting. Again, contact stress around the forearms here on both sides. This is where, and again, limited leg clearance due to the design of the cabinet, but also what I've seen many times is that this is, again, a secondary storage area. So this is cluttered with stuff, and it limits the person's accessibility to potentially even consider utilizing a footstool to maintain a more neutral position when seated. So let's kind of talk a little bit more about some healthier habits that we want to incorporate into our day. Ideally, when working remotely, we all tend to move less. There's less stimulus for us to move around. We're not going to meetings. The meeting's right on our computer at this point. So there's less stimulus for us to get up and move. So do make that time for yourself to get up and move around more often during the day. And this is critically important also, just to make sure you're doing that even when you do go back to the office. Again, you're human and your body systems require movement for improved circulation, improved joint health, improved clarity and alertness during your workday, because you're encouraging more blood flow moving out to the periphery. So it's recommended that you take at least 2 to 3 micro breaks, and again, about 30 to 60 minutes of duration, at least per hour. A simple activity that you can maybe monitor your activity is get a pedometer. Look at, again, correlating your activity with maybe step counting. A study that was released earlier this year talked about the average amount of step counts of 8,000 steps versus 2,000 steps. The group that had 8,000 steps was able to actually lower their mortality rate by 4 times just by incorporating more movement into their work area. And this group specifically was 40 years old and older. So lastly, what we're kind of wrapping up here is kind of just a quick review of an office or work environment that we want you to make some ergonomic guidelines and set up. Ultimately, raise your chair so your hands are and wrists are in position when you need to, and not need to shoulder shrug. So more in line with your work surface. If you elevate your seat, make sure you're elevating your feet. You may need to incorporate more of a lumbar support or towel to improve spinal stability. Bring your work tools closer to you and offload them on the weight. You may want to consider also flattening your keyboard to put your wrist in a more neutral position. Position the monitor at a height that's slightly below eye level and at least arm lengths away. Ideally, the angle of the monitor might need to change, so you're making the light source more perpendicular to your natural line of sight. And lastly, one of the things that we'd like to talk about is, again, make sure you're making more frequent postural changes as you're working through your workday. At this point, Michael, I'm going to pass the ball back to you because I think we have potentially a lucky winner who was chosen randomly for great ergonomic task chair.
We do. So we're going to give away, as promised, we're going to raffle off a human scaled world chair, which is an awesome chair that's very popular with all the adjustability that one would need. And the winner is Paul Miller from Artisan Biosciences. Congratulations, Paul.
Congratulations, Paul.
You.
All right.
So Paul, if you could email me your name and address and phone number where you can be reached, we'll make sure a chair gets delivered to you.
Okay, I'll do that.
Paul, and
Congratulations.
here's Michael's email on the screen here at this
Okay.
point. So at this point, I'd really like to open the floor to your questions. If there are any, I would encourage you to now. At this point, I really don't see anything in the chat. So feel free to unmute and ask the question, because if you have a question, there might be somebody else who has that same question. So feel free to open the door.
I know there was one question, Jason, that I'm not sure if everybody saw it, but along with the recording, is the slide deck also going to be available, or just the recording itself?
So just the recording will be available. We can also provide, along with this, we can provide a guideline for some ergonomic tools on setting up a home office or setting up a workstation better. So it's called a tip sheet, basically. So we
Okay.
can send that along as well. But all right. Felicia, you have a question? It looks like you raised your hand here.
I do, Jason. Thank you for this. It's been really good. I do have a quick question regarding sit stands. I here in what I did as far as the ergonomics, I had an here that had a sit stand and trying to adjust the L-shaped desk that required some additional tools, but at the end she still had a inch lip and it kind of limited her leg space. She's relatively tall. So my question to you is, how do we adjust that to make sure that she's in that neutral position with her arms when there is that additional inch or two lip on the on-surface sit stands? Okay,
so just to clarify here, so she's positioning this on the desktop sit stand in
Correct.
a corner. Okay.
Yes.
So in the corner, you're finding that it's an overlapped area, correct?
Correct.
All right. So this is actually not a bad thing. And one of the things that we may want to consider is potentially making that corner just a little bit bigger.
Okay.
By doing that, what you do is you move the unit closer. And so one of the things that you may want to consider doing is what Michael might be able to help you is, it's a tool called a corner sleeve, which basically fills the gap between that L shape of the desk and creates a new front edge. And that way you can bring the unit closer. The benefit of that is a corner sleeve will allow you to potentially also incorporate a keyboard tray, where oftentimes as we're adding height to the desk, we're having to bring our hands up even higher to type. So depending on her height, if she's not 6'4" and working on a standard desk, then we may need to consider maybe somehow lowering her hands down when she's in the seated position. And that will significantly reduce the demand on the back, naturally allowing her to sit back in her chair.
Okay, and then I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
So we consolidated, we purchased some sit stand tables, the electronic kind that just go down. Do you have any type of like pamphlets or guidelines that we could provide for our employees when trying to adjust, since they are adjusting from sit to stand and stand to sit, the monitors are going to need that constant adjustment. Did you have anything as far as guidelines or bullet points on that?
Yeah, so in the tip sheet that I'll send afterwards, there are some guidelines as far as adjusting, but the typical guideline for any of this is, again, adjusting the monitor so it's at or slightly below your eye level. Are these monitors on monitor arms? Are they easily adjustable?
Yes.
So again, I think ultimately it's just, we're talking a matter of a couple inches here, but because one of the things that happens naturally is when you go into a standing position, you actually move closer to the desk.
Correct.
And so you're also taller. Your torso gets a little taller. So oftentimes we need to push the monitor back slightly and slightly elevate it. And then when we sit, we need to bring it down.
Okay.
I know, again, with the human scale, as we're talking about, the human scale has made a huge adjustments to this by just providing a single arm to pull it on. That makes it
Mhm.
much easier to adjust if it's a dual monitor type system. It's a single arm that they can just hold on to, a handle basically.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Yep. Any other questions out there? These are great questions. Good. Thank you for your responses, Felicia, I'm sorry.
It's Mark Rose. I've got one question. I just submitted it in the chat, and that is, working at home, we don't always sit at desks.
Mhm.
And so, working from 6 a.m. till midnight, we end up sitting on the couch. We sit on easy chairs. We sit outdoors and chairs, all these things without desks. Any recommendations or help on what to do when using a laptop when you're not at a desk?
So the first recommendation I have to ask is, or a question I have to ask is, are you using an external keyboard or mouse?
Oh, not right now. No, especially
Okay.
not at a desk. To get a change of scenery, I definitely am not using an external keyboard.
So having a laptop and having just those two components allows you the ability to make ergonomic change. By design, the laptop, the monitor and keyboard are fixed. So your position is always going to be kind of down and in just based on the design of the laptop. The laptop was designed for portability and ease of use. It's not built for us. It's designed for that. So my biggest suggestion would be to get, again, maybe a compact keyboard and a small mouse. And wherever you travel, that's where you want to take those components with you. Maybe consider even just a lap tray so that you can take the laptop and then place it on some books. If you're working on a table, if you're working outside, maybe there's a planter that you can set it up on for temporary elevation of that screen, just to get that fresh air that you need to. But specifically with a laptop, it's very difficult to make any ergonomic change without those two components.
Okay. Thank you. I wasn't sure if there was anything you can do without the external monitor, because a lot of places you just can't put a monitor.
Yeah, again, you have your laptop, so you just may need to consider what do I place this on. Out in the market, there are very collapsible and portable laptop holders that you can just bring anywhere. Oftentimes, salesmen have those that are collapsible. They can put them in their backpack. They're usually probably about a foot long, fully compressed, and about 2 inches wide. So they're really small.
Okay, good. I'll look that up. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, at this point, I've got almost 10 of 1. If there are no other questions, we'll kind of give a last call for any other further questions. If there's not, then what I'd like to do is I'd like to practice what we preach here. And I want to give you 10 more minutes back in your day to go do some type of stretch, get up, move around, change your environment. Again, incorporate more movement into your day. But our contact information is on the screen. We'll leave this up for another few minutes if you need to write it down. But I appreciate everybody's time today, and thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated. If you have
Thank you, everyone.
If you have any questions as it relates to any products, feel free to email me at michael@strategicspaces.com. Have a great
Thank you,
day,
Michael.
everybody.
Thank you,
You're
Jason.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you,
great rest
Jason.
of your
Great
day.
job.
Mhm.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.
Too.